Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 402, and today's guest is Aaron Sekhri, CEO and co-founder of Lawak. Most apps are trying to get you to stare at your phone and create a stickiness factor for doom scrolling, yet Lawak wants you to look up and take in the world. If you have ever experienced a group tour for a museum or some other historical location, it can be a crapshoot, and for me, even with the best tour guide, I have a hard time focusing and taking it all in. This is where Lawak comes to the rescue. It is your personal tour guide right in your headphones. The company uses AI to enhance, not replace, human creativity. Every tour still relies on real guides, editors, and storytellers. AI just helps amplify their reach. Lawak recently announced a $4.1 million seed round of funding co-led by Adverb Ventures and Lara Hippo, with participation from Origins Fund and Point72 Ventures. In beta, Lawak has reached 110,000 downloads, 160,000 plus social followers, and 20,000 plus tours taken. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like Aaron's experience growing up in Hong Kong and how he landed at Stanford to study symbolic systems, getting his career started in product management while at Uber, his experience at TikTok and what he learned while he was there, all the details about Lawak and the plans ahead, their content playbook for customer acquisition, and why content is king when it comes to building traction for a startup, and their strategy around content, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. If you are interested in the entrepreneurial journey, well, then you've definitely come to the right place. Go to venturefizz.com/podcast to find over 400 episodes of Boston and New York's top entrepreneurs and investors. Each episode will give you a lot of information about their background story, plus what they're up to now, and some general advice questions about how to build a company. Again, go to venturefizz.com/podcast to take it all in and get a startup MBA. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Aaron. Aaron, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the time. Yeah.
I'm excited to talk to you because we're going to do something a little bit different than my typical podcast interview, which is deep into the person's background, which we're still going to do that. We're going to talk about that. But what I thought was really interesting about the current state of your company and product is you recently launched. So there's a lot to be learned, like things that you've experienced and playbook. So I almost feel like this is going to be one of those building in real-time exposure of an entrepreneur conversation type of thing. So I'm really excited to kind of get into some of the details there. But let's, before we do get into it, let's talk a bit about your background to set the stage. So where'd you grow up and what were you like as a child?
Yeah, I grew up in Hong Kong. I was a massive nerd. I joke. My wife is a varsity athlete. I say I was a varsity reader. I think that I was always just someone who was immersed in my study. I was super curious. Hong Kong is one of the most cosmopolitan places in the world. I went to a international school there where it was a French school, so a lot of diversity and a lot of exposure. And then I went to something called United World College, which is a 2-year program. And this was in Hong Kong. There's people from like 100 countries in one school. So my roommate was from Serbia. My other roommate was from Tajikistan.
Wow.
It was a really remarkable place. Shout out to United World College. I couldn't recommend it more highly, and really nurtured a lot of my curiosity.
That's so cool because I would just think you build lasting friendships and such an opportunity to travel and hopefully visit them.
100%. I think that's kind of one of the biggest benefits. You have a friend literally in every country in the world. It's remarkable.
Yeah, that's so cool. All right. So what led you to studying symbolic systems at Stanford?
I'm ethnically Indian. And I think my parents always thought, and I always thought I'd end up in the UK. It was just, it felt like the path. And then I was fortunate to get into Stanford. It was not honestly something that was on my radar. I just knew it was a good school. But I think when you're coming from a place like Hong Kong, you've never visited any of these schools. You don't know anything beyond the website. I didn't know a single person had ever been to Stanford. And then I visited and I said yes immediately on the spot. I think it's one of the most special places in the world. Symbolic Systems is a cognitive science degree. I think It's not been around for that long. I remember sort of going to different professors talking about different majors. And what struck out to me is Symbolic Systems at that point graduated 30 people a year. But the sort of impact per capita, of those people was astonishing. We had Reid Hoffman, one of the Instagram co-founders, Mr. Meyer, Scott Forstall, who was, one of the sort of fathers of the iPhone. All these people happened to be there for, I think, the 25th reunion, my freshman year, or the 25th anniversary of the program. Again, it was actually very simple. It was a very simple choice. It seemed like remarkable people were coming out of it, and you got to study things, across the board. Again, that quintessential American liberal arts that, was propagandized to me and that I like fully bought into, basically.
So all those people graduated
Yeah.
from that same program at Stanford.
Yeah.
Wow,
With
that is
graduating
extraordinary.
class, like 20, 30 people. It truly is extraordinary. And again, I feel like it almost was a magnet to a certain type of person. And I don't,
Right.
obviously know if I think what was very cool to me was to see the other people who joined. And I felt like I found a community. And, I met my wife there. She's also a Symbolic Systems major. So it worked out,
Very cool. All right. So did you fully embrace the tech scene then once you kind of got in the Bay Area and was exposed to all that?
Yeah, I thought I was going to be a journalist. My first ever internship was at Al Jazeera in Qatar. I really, while everyone was trying really hard for a Wall Street Journal or a New York Times sort of like internship, I realized that you go somewhere really like prolific, that was sort of off the beaten path. I think that's something that in my career I've thought about quite a bit. But I ended up writing an article about Coursera, and I met Daphne Kohler and Andrew Ng. And I think it was the first time that I realized what the scale of technology sort of allowed for, right? The notion that you could give people a world, at the time, that's obviously what we thought. And maybe MOOCs haven't worked out in the way we thought. But at the end of the day, the ambition was, I want to give everyone the ability to take a Stanford course, right? That was profound to me. So I actually ended up sort of, that was one of my next internships actually, was at Coursera itself. And I fully immersed myself in it. I think if I'd gone somewhere else, I would have had a very different life, but Stanford afforded me that.
Well, so your internship at Coursera, it was focused on growth, right?
Yeah. Yep. It was focused on growth. And it was a lot of different, it was a lot of different facets of how a company like that could grow. And it was also just a very novel working environment. Even something as simple as, I remember every desk was a flex desk. And Andrew Ng, every couple days a week would sort of just be on the desk next to me, and you just like be able to like talk to this person and, have exposure. So the content of the internship is something that escapes me, but I think that the ethos of what it means to work in like a flat hierarchy, to have incredibly large ambitions, to work with outstanding people. I think every single person I met there has gone on to do something like prolific, and I also think that it taught me about what sort of like, now we call it high talent density, but I think it was one of those places that just had an extremely high density of talent. And I remember getting advice that that's where you go. That's how you sort of build a career.
All right. Well, great
Yeah.
segue here. So how did you get your career started after graduation?
Yeah, well, I was a TA of a class in the business school, and Alex Karp spoke in that class, and one of his people sort of was telling me about Palantir. This was early senior year, and it was right across the street in Palo Alto, which made it an easy kind of beacon, and it was where all the clever people went. And I think that these heuristics seem a little bit simple, but where all the clever people are going a few years before the thing is a household name is quite a good heuristic, right? It's a very good heuristic. It's almost, there's these product leaders you really admire, and I believe there's one from OpenAI who, was at Facebook and then Uber and then OpenAI early, and you can just see like certain people like know where the puck is going, and it just seemed like everyone was remarkable, didn't understand the product, and didn't really have the best grasp of what they do. I think that's somewhat intentional. I think most people today even do not have a great grasp of what they do. But it was an incredible opportunity, and I ended up working on just a variety of sort of clients there as a basically deployment strategist is what they called it. Incredible exposure to problems, incredible exposure to data problems. And the funny thing is now with LLMs, so many of those issues seem quaint. Like the things we worked on are now table stakes, but it's funny to think about in 2015, 2016, how these felt like intractable problems, that you were dealing with.
Yeah, that's crazy how things have evolved and so quickly. So you spent a good almost, I don't know, 3.5, 4 years there. And then what'd you do after that?
Yeah, well, I'm someone who gets obsessed. And I think my obsession 2018 was autonomous vehicles. I fully bought into the propaganda that it was right around the corner, that every car, by 2025 now would be a autonomous car roving the streets, and off by a little bit, but I think that the prediction will still stand. I just thought it was, again, a very Silicon Valley thing to say, we see the future, we're going to build it here. We have this steadfast belief. Interviewed at a million sort of places, only focus on self-driving cars, and end up at Uber with some amazing people, with the thesis that you're still going to need to hail these cars through one of the aggregators, and this is the one, right? So for me, what was most compelling about it was I still believe that at the end of the day, you're going to open your Uber app. There may be a courier that's a human or a driver that's a robot, but at the central point of demand aggregation will like remain the same potentially. And so I worked on a number of different products to make it possible for you to hail a third-party self-driving car on the Uber network. So we were within that division, but it was sort of focusing on those other problems. And I think that is now being used for the first time ever in, I believe, Austin and Atlanta with Waymo and Uber. And probably it's been, scrapped and redone, but I think that the thesis still stood. And that brought me in from sort of 2019 into the pandemic.
Yeah, because I was listening to Acquired podcast, and they've had a very three different episodes about Google from the early days to the mid to where they are today. And they talked about how much they invested and basically made Waymo what it is today. And they were talking how it is becoming reality. I think they talked about Arizona was a place they originally launched, and then San Francisco. So it seems like it's still going to happen. It just, it's been an 11-year problem that Waymo's been working on that is finally becoming a reality. It's not like it's just going to be everywhere, but in major cities and maybe eventually everywhere. But just, it seems like we're kind of finally getting there of this being a reality in cities. But I'm excited about it. It just makes sense.
100% makes sense. It's safer. It's more efficient. The reason they chose Phoenix in the early days, for example, is that Phoenix is highly conducive. The visibility is great. Doesn't rain very often. The roads are wide.
Right.
There is enough of a grid, right? There's so many things that the ingredients, and that's something we worked on as well that I touched there of what were the markets that were most conducive and how much of it could we sort of capture. I think it is an inevitability. I think Waymo's one of the most impressive companies in the world. I don't think it gets thought of that way in as much as the product experience, and I think this is a feature, not a bug, is highly mundane. Yes, you get in. Yes, the first time you take one, it is astonishing. You take a video, you send it to family and say, look where I am. And then the second and third and fourth times, you sometimes forget to look up even because you're buried in your phone, because you're in this private environment, basically. And I think because it is mundane as it should be, it doesn't get that sort of credit. But I think it's one of the most impressive companies in the world. I think it's going to, really transform how we get around.
Yeah. And it's so, Rylan Hamilton is founder of a robotics company, Six River Robotics, that was acquired by Shopify. And he's a former naval officer that is building autonomous ships for the open ocean. So
Wow.
it's just it's just mind blowing type of thing. So like these big ships that are going to be like cargo and transportation for vehicles type of thing. It's not going to be manned, soldier
Yeah.
type of ships, but this is going to be replicated across all different types of vehicles. So
I have to say, one of my most, I think the prediction I'm proudest of in my entire life, and I have an entire thesis to back it up, is in 2014, I decided to do a thesis, and there's a department at Stanford called Ethics and Society. By the way, I haven't thought about this in a long time, so it's all coming back to me. And I looked at drones and drone warfare, and this was sort of during the Obama administration, but it was very targeted. And I wrote a very, 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 very probably too long thesis about my predictions about the future of war and the idea that in a world where it was cheaper to execute war and there was a lesser sort of impact of blood and treasure, right? The two sort of main ingredients that regulate warfare, that you would see low grade persistent warfare all around the world in very different fashion. And I think with the exception of a few sort of specifics, I think what you're seeing around the world today, in Ukraine especially, really was validated. And I think it was something that for me in that time felt clear as day, as just the future, especially in that arena. Which obviously there's so much to unpack there, and there's some incredibly like powerful ethical reasons and some very dark undertones, but it's something that I was thinking about like for a while and seems to have borne out.
yeah. All right. So from there you went to TikTok. So what'd you do at TikTok?
So yeah, I mean, what's funny is I think it was the pandemic. I realized that the cars were simply not going to be everywhere, from head to top to bottom of Manhattan anytime soon. I was in New York, and I think that I almost chose the opposite of a self-driving car company. Something that very little delayed gratification, something that was sort of just ripping, great people, great product. And TikTok, as I was sort of looking at new opportunities, it felt like TikTok was, I felt like ByteDance, and I think in 2020 wasn't as well appreciated, was just the most impressive company in the world. Like in terms of revenue growth, in terms of sort of product penetration, in terms of vision, in terms of product kind of ideation, this notion of lowering the barrier to creation that TikTok had, the bet on short form video, even just the fact that, one thing I like to think about with TikTok a lot is every single action feeds the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to design a product for an algorithm, with the algorithm as a stakeholder, like almost personified, you would end up with something like TikTok, right? On Twitter or Reddit, you're just scrolling, and of course you can kind of impute what you like or what you don't. But TikTok does force you to give it some type of signal, whether it's implied or it's active, right? There's so many ingredients where, I was talking to the head of product at TikTok, his name was Sean, in the US. He was sort of talking to me about this product as almost it wasn't an entertainment platform, it was a marketplace, but it was a marketplace for the supply and demand of content. Why, if you think about everything being able to manifest as content, whether it's podcasts or apartment tours, why could they not figure out, just as well as it could figure out what podcast for you to find, why could it not sort of figure out what apartment you would like on the Lower East Side? I just thought the ambition was so prolific, and it felt sort of, even in 2020, it felt like a secret because it was still looked at like as a fun app. People are downloading the pandemic to like do dances and entertain themselves, right? So remarkable company, it was, I think, the most impressive company I've ever worked at. I'm so impressed with the people I was with over there, and I did a variety of stuff on the mini app side first, where we basically had this aspiration to allow you to fulfill the last mile of your user need on TikTok, right? So yes, I have found this concert. Can I buy tickets? Yes, I found this recipe. Can I save it? Yes, I found this incredible independent creative. Can I book them directly, right? So we worked on that for a while, and you can still see some of those things, like the like in what we did with Ticketmaster, for example, that was driving real GMV for both companies. And then after that, I started working on paid content, specifically a product called TikTok Series. Um, in many ways, I think any consumer founder listening to this should just look to China. Like they should look east to say, hey, where's the world going to be in 5 years? You had live shopping and then TikTok live and whatnot and everything. Um, serialized mini dramas are a exploding. Have you heard of this? Have you heard about this sort of product?
I don't think I have. No.
Absolutely massive. These are 60-second episodes. So imagine this is not the great content, but imagine sort of soap operas. Essentially, they're in 60-second increments, of which there are 60 in a series, and people watch these voraciously. These are some of the fastest growing products in China right now. There's a few entrants in the US, but that was sort of like one of the sort of inspirations for what we were doing, and bringing that over here. So a really special time at TikTok.
I guess that's what was it Quib that was doing short form Quibi that was doing short form. I guess they should have gone in that direction, like making it even shorter, 60-second episodes versus whatever they tried to do.
100%. And they sort of did it on the other side of like, let's spend as much money as possible. These short form serialized mini dramas are created as cheaply as possible. I'm not going to tell you that they're like a very high art form, but the growth and the sort of tapping into user needs and the appreciation of the media format and the user need, I think, was very powerful. Ultimately, they realized that essentially they can deliver some type of cliffhanger every 60 seconds, essentially, so that the stay time and the completion rate on these things and the retention is just outstanding, because they really got to like the id of the user and like what keeps them coming back for story.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right. So how much did TikTok influence what, and I guess we can talk about what you're doing now as far as your company. So kind of the origin of Lawak and kind of what you're up to now.
100%. So Lawak, my current company, is a tour guide in your headphones. You put your headphones on, you choose a particular experience. We're live in 5 cities. So if you're going to Paris, Rome, Florence, Barcelona, or London anytime soon, definitely check us out. It is a heads up experience. So once you put your headphones on and you've chosen your experience, you put your phone away. We know where you are and we guide you as if there's someone there, and we use your location to do that. Candidly, TikTok influenced that decision and this product enormously, but not in the way you'd think. I think we understand what makes good content, but fundamentally we saw a world where you're sucked in. You're looking down, you're craning your neck, you're in a position where you're hunched over. There's a fun TikTok trend, which is like you're scrolling and it says stop, take a picture of yourself mid scroll and comment with that picture, because now TikTok allows pictures in the comments. And it's just the most dismal kind of pictures. And everyone's commiserating that they're in the same situation. 100% doom scrolling. No one looks good. Everyone's kind of hunched, many chins are spilling out, however fit you may be. And It's a situation that I think that we kind of rejected. It's very aspirational, obviously, but we believe that tech can help you engage with the wider world. We created this company because we wanted this product ourselves. There's been a few iterations of this in the past, but I think that the genesis of this company is going around and feeling like we're operating mindlessly, right? You're at Notre Dame. It's beautiful. It's impressive. But why is it there? Why is it this persistent symbol of Paris? Why is it iconic, right? Why does it matter? Why is it important? And you may think like, hey, how many people care? I think everyone who's there cares to some extent. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there, right? You know? And I think that this solution simply did not exist. There was a modality, the human-driven tour, that is something that, satisfies that need, but I don't think it does in a modern consumer-centric way, right? You don't know what quality you're getting. Some guides are incredible. We work with many of them. Some guides are reading off of a script. You're with a group. That's the number one thing we heard is like, listen, I don't want to be with a group, right?
And just the group experience. So I went to Italy with my family 2 years ago, and we did lots of tours. And like you said, some are entertaining and they engage you and they get you sucked in to actually pay attention. I'm the type of person that will tune out if I can't really hear and like they're not talking about something that's really like captivating me. So, so I'm in that bucket.
Absolutely. And why should you not be, right? Like you at the end of the day, it's not a modality that works for most people, right? In a consistent way. Of course, I mean, it would be amazing if everyone could do a private tour, but if you want to go today and do a private tour of the Louvre, it costs $700, on average, with someone good, right? Because this is what the market commands. And so we realized that there was a real opportunity to create this in a scaled way, especially around the advent of LLMs and generative voice. So I'm happy to go in whatever direction here.
Yeah, let's break it down on what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with the best guides in the city. We are not an AI tour guide. And I think we're quite adamant to not be, right? We care greatly about digitizing the 99th percentile guide, right? So if you want to talk about sort of early days of building a startup, we would go and we would just sort of go on to hundreds of tours ourselves. I am so much more knowledgeable than I was prior to this experience. I feel like I'd give some of these honestly on my end, and we realized in a very like concrete way what makes a good experience, what makes something captivating, right? As you were just saying. Right? What is something that hooks you as you're going along? Who are the people that do that? Then we basically work with these guides to digitize their experiences, but we use a really sort of sophisticated pipeline to take the raw content of what they say and to transform it into essentially a moving podcast. You can think of what we do as quite similar to Notebook LM. We've actually had some amazing help from some of the folks who pioneered that experience. So it's real people, but we get to scale by digitizing them and adapting what they say in minutes, right? Over what, a potential alternate product like an audio guide would take is months. I know I've interviewed a lot of people who work at museums. I've interviewed a lot of guides who have built some of these products. These products takes months to do because you need to create a script. You need to optimize the script based on the amount of time you are in each different place. We are able to use AI essentially to cleave up 60 minutes worth of content to chunks of 125 words for a particular, intersection essentially. So the immersiveness comes from the fact that we break up the tour exactly on the path in a way that's exceptionally precise. And we use almost a video game like engine as you are proceeding through and hitting all these GPS pings to keep you on the path essentially, right? So the product experience ends up being especially immersive. I think the thing that's resonated most with our users is the product experience. It's the fact that it feels like audio augmented reality. When you think of augmented reality, you think of visual. Everyone thinks of glasses or Vision Pro or something like that. But augmented reality is just simply reality that is enhanced in some way. Why not sonically? If people are still, may disagree with that, I'll ask you, if you're walking down the street in New York City and you're listening to jazz versus rap, how are you feeling? And I think you're a transformed person, right? I think sound has this incredible resonance. And so what we're able to do is tell you these stories exactly where you should hear them in the most resonant way, right? So I'll give you an example. We have an incredible World War II tour of Paris. You get to a certain part of the Seine and you get onto a bridge, and right on this little alcove, you sort of go in on this overlook over the river, and you hear bombs go off. And you hear that the final plan for Paris as the Nazis were retreating was to blow up the banks of the Seine. So you've just been hearing about all these tales of heroism, subversion, resistance, and it all culminates right here, where a German general was ordered by Hitler, and he was screamed at over the phone, and Hitler would ask him, "Is Paris burning?" And you're hearing this as you are hearing all of these sound effects, this narration overlooking the Seine, which would have flooded the city had the plan gone through. And you end at Notre Dame, where you're hearing the speech that Charles de Gaulle gave with, sort of the music playing in the background that he gave right there, having liberated Paris. Like, that tour actually is one of our highest rated ones, and people have goosebumps all the time because it's something where you feel like, one user of that tour said, it feels like being in a movie and you're the main character, but no one else around you knows. So it's surreal,
It's very cool. Yeah. So you announced a round of funding, so 4.1 million from Adverb Ventures, Lara Hippo, Origins, and Point 72 Ventures.
Yeah.
What was the appetite for what you were doing? Raising funding. First time founder, right?
Yeah.
It's the funding climate's a little rocky out there. Like maybe not as much for if you're doing something that's AI native and seed funding. Like the later stages seem to be tougher. But so what was your experience raising capital?
Honestly, it was a really good experience because I look at everything as a matching sort of game, right? I think it's something that for some people didn't make as much sense with their sort of like fund size and appetite and outlook on the world. And for some people, it made an enormous amount of sense. We went out with a demo that we worked on, for quite some time, just a really beautiful one of someone narrating a tour over the Brooklyn Bridge. And we had people who were keen do it. We said, listen, like, I want you to do it. And I want you to think whether everyone in the world is going to be doing this 10 years from now, or an enhanced version. And if you don't, that's completely fine. But if you do, like, I think that's what we're trying to build towards. What's really powerful, I think we use sort of like the power of the product to our advantage, is that it is profoundly immersive. It is very rich. It is very animating. So it was, a number of conversations. Obviously, it wasn't sort of you walk in the door, but I think with the people who it resonated with, the answer was almost immediate, right? Actually, like, it was actually very, very quick once we found the right people, and we just are so enamored with our partners. Origins actually was the first sort of to write a small check early on, and they grokked it immediately. They realized this is a French firm. We happened to start our beta in Paris, which I can tell you a little bit more about in a moment, obviously. And it was something where it was automatic to them, right? So if I were to say to anybody, in this sort of position, I don't think no's are bad. I don't think no's are bad at all. I think no's are data. And it's either data for sort of what you're building or for how someone else sees the world, right? And it actually ended up being a pretty fruitful and, not a process with a ton of heartburn. I think it was just about finding the right partners, and we found some amazing partners.
All right. So I want to shift to the playbook part of the conversation, because what you've built, I'm sure there's, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of tour guides in the Apple App Store, right?
Yeah.
Not what you're doing with the immersive AI generated experience, but there's still that legacy. And I'm sure there's a whole slew of them that just have a there's no, they're not getting new customers, right? The customer adoption process is really hard. So to do a consumer product, to build what you built, to get the content, to then get the downloads, the consumer, that's really hard to do in today's world where there's so many options. So how did you
Yeah,
get started and each kind of step and journey along the way?
100%. So to anyone listening who is thinking about who's in this sort of area, I'd say one very simple thing. Content is, I think, the most important way to grow in the early days. Obviously, ultimately, network effects are much more important, right? Figuring out how to grow with your sort of individual customers, retention becomes super critical. But in the beginning, if you want to break out, I would think about it as just like a video going viral, essentially, right? Ultimately, your product still has to be good, but we have technologies today where you do not need existing following and you do not need anything other than a video that breaks through to get to hundreds of thousands or even millions of people, right? That exists for the first time ever. And I think every founder should be thinking about that in the very early days if they're just trying to get the word out. This was a thesis I had at TikTok. As part of my sort of angel investing sort of career, I helped a number of companies sort of think through this exact playbook. I think that it should not be a really large portion of your customer acquisition efforts at maturity, but I think in the earliest days, it's a very, very powerful tool. So what we did is at the same time we launched sort of our beta in Paris, we worked with a number of guides. We got we created a product portfolio that we were proud of, that encompassed the classics like the Louvre, but it also encompassed very off the beaten path experiences. So we basically said, hey, what's the MVP representation of our vision, right? Who's going to get it? Then we marketed it to something, we marketed it in a way that was very different. On our App Store page, we actually said, this is a tours app that tour haters will enjoy, right? We literally wanted to say, if you are repelled by the group, if you think it is dystopian to be on a big bus, if you don't want to be shepherded around by a person with a flag, but you still want the information, this is for you. And I think that that's where we understood our customer really well. And I think where we counterpositioned quite well. So that was, those are the ingredients, that's the sort of platform. And then we say, okay, how do we get the word out? So we realized that working with creators, not in a paid content, sponsored content way, but working with a certain category of creator, who is budding. I would say the budding creator, someone from 10,000 followers to 30,000 followers, for whom it is very much just a hobby, maybe in a category that doesn't monetize very well. What's very appealing is saying, hey, work for us, generate as many videos as possible. We'll do a bonus system so that if anything breaks out, you're compensated accordingly, and just put stuff out there. So we set up the same day we sort of went on the App Store. We had already been putting out content for a few weeks, just to warm up those accounts, where we said, don't treat the algorithm as something scary. Treat it as information, right? So put as many permutations and combinations of content as you can find or figure out, and see what resonates with the audience. One thing that brands do that I think is very wrong when it comes to content is that they're very precious about their identity and how they convey themselves to the world. That is a mistake. You are there to make good videos. You are there to make good content independent of anything that exists in your sort of brand ecosystem, right? It's content first. And because it is content first, you may need to abandon certain principles or features of your brand or of your product offering or whatnot, right? So we took a very agnostic approach. We didn't have a brand. We still honestly don't do our work in a very cohesive way. What we do is, how do we break out? How do we get as many people coming to that link in bio to download our app? And it's worked really well, so on a on a shoestring budget, we've been able to achieve those 100,000 plus downloads. Of those, we've had at this point about 25,000 tours taken. We have a cumulative 180,000 followers across all of our TikTok and Instagram accounts. And by the way, there's even more aggressive ways of doing this, with clip farmings and with edits. And there's so many different ways that we haven't even touched. But the first thing I would say is, if you can make content yourself, great. If you can't, farm it out. And I can talk about the very specific playbook, so we can go into any direction you want to here. farm it out, work with these budding creators. They love something regular, right? Like, being a creator is a very difficult process. I'll simply, you're negotiating a brand deal over 10 emails. They're giving you a very rote script. You're essentially just regurgitating what they're telling you. A creator loves if you say, hey, listen, don't say anything bad about the product. That's your only limitation. Go nuts and try to get a 1 million view video, right? That's very powerful. And that's, I think, been an outstanding way for us to grow. I think in the future, our growth needs to come from partnerships, from virality, from network effects, from people doing it together, from working with institutions who market on our behalf. But for now, it's been a great way of getting out and breaking out.
So how many creators did you work with, and how often were they posting? Like, how many like videos did your account, because they had access to your Instagram and TikTok to upload, and so how often, and did you have any control over like their, like, you knew that they would probably create good content, so you weren't worried
Yeah.
about, like, like I think people do worry about.
Yeah, nitty gritty. We worked with
Yeah.
2 in the beginning, but it got up to sort of 8. They were posting 5 videos a week. So we were doing, on average, like 40 videos a week at one point, which we felt a little bit unnecessary, but you can see that we have, I think, 700-800 videos posted just on Instagram without the sort of ones that we've deleted. They had carte blanche access, so they have access to the accounts. We did not approve a single piece of content. We have never approved a piece of content. What we would do is we'd have a weekly meeting. We'd have a lot of ideas. I think about content as sort of the message, the content, the format. So what does that mean? The message is what you're trying to say. The content is the actual thing that is being conveyed, like very specifically, and the format is how. So the message could be travel in a more independent sort of way, right? The content could be, 5 tips for a solo traveler, and the format is a carousel. But you can also tweak that to be, okay, the format is a selfie view video of a person representing themselves as a solo traveler giving advice. Or one could be an interview with a solo traveler with the same thing. Those are 3 permutations of the same idea. So what we would do is talk about these permutations, see whichever one the creators had the most confidence in themselves, and they would just go ahead and do it. And because we were getting these sort of creators who have established some following, have an aesthetic, have a style, we know that as long as they're doing good work, they would represent us in a proper way, in an appropriate way, And so I would highly recommend just like being very comfortable with what they say and thinking about, like, if you have conviction over a certain particular angle, like we think that itineraries is like a great way to do it. Try dozens, hundreds of permutations of itineraries, as content, whether it's video, whether it's carousels, whether it's biasing to the comment section, whether it's, or in the caption, sorry, whether it's responding to people individually and doing bespoke ones in the comments, using AI on our end. There's so many different ways of sort of getting across. And I think people don't use the algorithm to tell them which of those things is successful.
But I think people would like argue, like, I don't know what the algorithm's doing. It's like this mystery
Yeah.
box. So how do you play into that if you don't know what?
It's the performance. So we look at basically all these permutations and ask ourselves which performed and which didn't. I think, yes, it is a mystery box. I think that, I don't know, there's probably 7 people at TikTok who in their sort of like core deeply understand, and even they could not predict who goes viral or could watch 10 videos and tell you which one will. I think that that's a really astute point on your end. I think you want to treat it as a black box and you want to get the data back. And that's why you post with that enormous amount of volume. If you use the volume to your advantage, you will understand what resonates, right? And the manner in which it resonates. And that has been our sort of trick, is to forget about any of our preconceived notions and let the market, let the algorithm, let the users tell us, hey, we really love, a format that's been working for us is coming to Paris in X month, and the X month is exactly a month or 2 months away. So I could sit with you and we could, we could have sat together, we could have storyboarded, we could have taught about a user, we could have come up with some thesis of when do people plan. I could have done research. I could have said, when do people plan their holidays? When are they primed to start thinking, oh, it's about a month and a half out. Maybe we should start putting some effort. We could have done this, but we'd be wrong about another 100, right? So the right way to do it is to like put a dozen things out there, and then we realize post hoc, hey, this is actually the way to engage a number of people in a way that's highly conducive to them downloading and engaging with our app as well, right? That's the sort of thing. And, for example, yes, we do a lot of these sort of like videos about go to this restaurant. Is it hyped or is it underhyped or not? Those are great videos. They actually go very viral, but they don't lead to as many downloads because who's commenting on it? It's Parisians, and it's people saying, no, it's overrated. It's horrible. It goes to a different channel of people, right? Like I like to think, you have to think about TikTok as sort of like, it's a conduit. It's a marketplace. It's a network. It's sort of taking the content and basically figuring out, we're going to show it to a few people. We'll see what they think. Great, it resonates with some of those. Let's show it to more people with those similar characteristics, and then on and on and on until it sort of becomes viral. So you have videos sometimes you're like, yeah, I have a bunch of comments in Polish. Like somehow this ended up in Polish TikTok, that like slice of it. Like, how do you figure out the conduits? It's seeing, okay, well, we had this sort of degree of performance. What videos cause that performance? Great, this super like rage baity, we actually love this like super overhyped restaurant, but that didn't lead to actual material downloads. But like these itineraries, for example, do really well. And this learning is actually very easy to do if you're posting like 40 videos a week,
Yeah. So do ratings matter in the App Store, and how do you incentivize people to actually lead one? Because anytime I get that little pop up, it's like,
Yeah.
I gotta get out as fast as possible.
A very tactical. So ratings matter a lot. It helps for discoverability. It helps for honestly just like credibility. If you send one of these, I feel like there's a lot of apps who have, these companies raise $10-20 million and they have like 20 reviews in the App Store. It's a 3.6.
Right.
And it's like, what's going on here, right?
Right.
What we do is honestly, we change it and we sort of do a personal appeal and say like, we'll even put a picture of sort of like the founding team or the guide and say like, your review helps other people enjoy this experience in a certain way and allows them to discover like the secret. So I actually went on ChatGPT and we had a long conversation about what motivates someone to leave a review. So there's status, there's altruism, there's, you kind of name it, in terms of like 5 or 6 core motivators. And when we created these permutations for our prompt screen with all of these sort of different appeals, right? And altruism works really well. Status works really well. Like letting people in on a secret and being like the steward of that secret works really well. And I think that what's really cool about, just using AI is you essentially have a researcher. Like people have spent hundreds of hours, thousands of hours on sort of these questions. And now I get to type it in with a quick prompt and then it'll generate the copy as well for me. Right. So that's how we do it. And I think AI is an incredible accelerant for those types of like, just increase the performance of those types of prompts.
All right. So what does success look like for you? Like what's your, I guess, because there's milestones, right? Of you just raised your seed round of funding to get to the A or whatever. Like what are you looking ahead? What do you anticipate?
Absolutely. We want to be ubiquitous. I think success looks like just incredible, aggressive product love in a variety of geographies where we've replicated our initial success with Paris and a number of partnerships with incredible institutions and hospitality sort of providers to, provide this to all of their guests. We have some pretty aggressive plans, both in terms of content coverage, so about how many cities we're in with how much content, but then on the sort of monetization side, we have a number of different sort of tactics that we're exploring where, right now the product is free for consumers. It could be free for a while for consumers if, you know, different folks in the sort of ecosystem are paying en masse for these sorts of things. And we're getting just a lot of interest from attractions and from hospitality partners who say, hey, because this is generative, right? The content is still, from a human, but the playback is generative. You can create extremely bespoke experience. So if you're a hotel, you can create something that is tailored to that individual, right? You cannot do that with any sort of other platform. If you're a cruise, can you have a user do this tour and midway through the tour it tell you, hey, your boat's leaving in an hour, like you better get back, right? So
Right.
we have a lot of interest from folks in those domains. So success
Yeah.
looks like ubiquity, and success looks like a number of different sort of channel partners who can take our distribution and monetization to the next level.
And that's, I was going to ask about the
Yeah.
monetization strategy,
Yeah.
because part of me was like these tour guides that are providing
Yeah.
this great content for you. It's kind of cannibalizing their business a little bit potentially.
So it's very funny you say that, because that we get that all the time, right? We get that all the time. And then we work with people specifically who almost exclusively do private tours, whose average kind of tour is $500 to $700, and whose average customer is a 60-year-old American from Wisconsin, or from Florida or where else. Like, they are mostly tailoring to an American market, but they are generally on the older side. They look at that guide not just as a tour guide, but also as a kind of local for hire, essentially, right? Who can help them navigate the contours of their day and the experience, where it's just as important to talk to them about Notre Dame, but just as important to take them into the bistro after and help them order and navigate rude French service. You can edit that part out. I'm joking. But I think that essentially they look at what we're doing as, hey, you're going after a completely different audience. And honestly, every single person we work with would do this for free or otherwise. We obviously compensate well. We're really good partners to our guides, but you don't become a guide because you want to keep information and knowledge to yourself. Like, every single person is proud of the city they live. We have locals in every single city who are giving these tours. They want more people to know about these places, and they want to share that message widely. And then they see us as a means to get there.
How much of Airbnb's business is experiences now?
Not as much as they want. In their S1, they wrote that they wanted it to be bigger than core experiences, than the core stays, right? It is not there yet. They've launched and relaunched many times over. I think they're one of the most impressive companies in the world, so they will figure this out. But right now, the way they're doing it is that they want their supply to be extremely bespoke. They want one-of-one experiences, and it remains to be seen whether the consumer actually wants that or how many consumers actually want it. Something from our data, in the beginning, we did the same thing. We went super niche to start. And then people just said, well, do you have a tour of the Louvre? Because of course, if you're coming to Paris, you're going to the Louvre,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what you want to do. So I think that was a big learning for us, and I'm really impressed with their execution, but it's a pretty small part of their business right now, and the content is very niche.
Yeah. All
Purposefully.
right. Three apps you can't live without. Can't be Slack, email, calendar, or your own app.
Well, okay. So I know it can't be Slack, but this is a new one that
Okay.
people don't know about. So at ByteDance, we use something called Lark. Lark is a Slack, Google Docs, whatever else killer. It is all in one, and and I think it treats every single unit, every single item as a message. So I'm sorry to break that rule, but I have to. Because it is a remarkable piece of enterprise software. It is not very well adopted because I think, there's certain brand kind of liabilities that using a ByteDance product has, but it is a productivity tool that we cannot live without. And I think the design is outstanding. It treats everything as a message, whether that's an analytics report or a expense item you need to do. Everything is done in the same sort of structure, in the same sort of unit. Other apps, I'll give you one that's a little bit new. There's an app called My Mind. Ultimately, there's always been a hope to be like, okay, what's the app where you can store everything? So I used to use Pocket. I think I had 12,000 articles in Pocket, like,
Right.
because I
Yeah.
just downloaded it because they just suspended, I think it was something crazy. Something like actually crazy. But the problem is, what if it's an image? Oh, okay, maybe that is saved in Pinterest or, with the new sort of app like a Cosmos or something. What if it's just text? What if it's just a quote? What if it's a podcast? Now with LLMs, now with AI, you can actually, with multimodal AI, you can actually have an app that deals with all of them, right? Deals with all of them as like in an interoperable way. So I really love furniture. There's a great New York Times article about a certain chair. There's maybe a picture of a different chair, and then there's a listing for a different product. One is a product page. One is an image. One is an article. I type in chair, and all three of them show up, and I can actually manage them in a sort of cohesive way. I'm not a power user yet, but I really do enjoy that product. And ultimately, the third one, can't live without. I have an 8-month-old. There's an app called Nanit. It is a cloud-based baby monitor, and it is an absolute lifesaver. And I'm not a very type A parent at all. But it is pretty remarkable just to think that at any moment, I have eyes, I have analytics, I have everything on my baby. So it gives me comfort.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll have to check out My Mind.
Yeah.
How about a podcast or book recommendation for entrepreneurs?
So the book recommendations, thinking about this, I was reading through my library last night. There's a book called Picasso's War, and it is about the birth of modern art in America. Something about Picasso. Picasso doesn't feature; it's more about his artwork and others. But here's the point I think that's important. It's two halves of the book. One is about a guy named John Quinn, and he is the father of essentially modern art in America. The point of the book is that singular individuals can make enormous cultural waves. Modern art was scorned in America for decades, right? Many decades. Picasso were not treated with any respect or reverence that we have sort of now. This one individual saw through and saw the future and said, this is the future of art. This is what will be appreciated. In the book, it describes him having essentially a collection of what would be worth today multiple billions of dollars worth of his art in his home. And he had so much artwork that he could not he could not put them on the walls. So some of the most priceless paintings that are in the MoMA today were on the floors of his home because he bought so prolifically, as sometimes in many situations the only American buyer in the 1910s of this art, like singular. He was a lawyer as well who defended James Joyce for Ulysses. I think there was controversy with that book at the time. He was a steadfast believer in the arts, and he died early, so he was actually never able to see the fruits of his efforts. But what is interesting about that book is, like, quite literally, even in that information economy, now we have a different one where it's actually much easier to do that. But singular individuals with incredibly dogged visions can make enormous cultural change. And I didn't want to give like a business book, but I do think like this is one where it's deeply inspirational for whatever field you're in. And I think now we have the tools to make that possible in a way that never existed before.
Very, very cool. All right. So obviously you're busy with an 8-month-old, but what do you like to do for fun outside of work?
I think there's not been a lot of fun outside of work. And I think that, has been it's been something that's sort of been on my mind. But honestly, just like spending time with her is, I think, the greatest joy I could possibly get. How's this? I don't think I miss anything that's fun outside of work with, given her. I think big plug. I think a lot of the things that you think you're going to miss out on, you forget. But I think working out, tennis especially, either watching or playing, is like my favorite thing in the world. And that gives me a great amount of joy. So we're entering the off season right now. So I'm going to try to still go to a bubble court now and then, but adore tennis and just wish I could play it more.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background, obviously all the great work you and your team are up to at LeWalk, and wishing you all great success ahead.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. I love the questions, and we're just, if you're in Paris, Rome, Barcelona, Florence, London, give us a download. It's LeWalk, LEWALK, and really glad to have the conversation.